Welcome to the Academic Writing Amplified podcast. On this podcast, we believe that the culture of academia needs to change radically. Women and non-binary people are revolutionizing academia within institutions that were not built for us. If you're ready to reject the culture of overwork, kick guilt and overwhelm to the curb, and amplify your voice to make a real impact on your field without breaking down or burning out, you're in the right place. With our team of experienced writing coaches as co-hosts, we'll share insights and talk to inspiring guests to bring you the practical strategies, systems, and mindset shifts you need to find time to write, publish work you love, and design your career on your terms. And it all starts with writing. Let's go. Hello. This is Kathy Mazak, and I just wanted to pop in here before we listen to this episode with Elevate alumni Lauren Braun-Strumfels. I am so excited for you to hear this episode. It is a re-release, but upon hearing it again, I'm sure you're going to get just excited as I did. A quick note before the episode starts. Our Elevate program is open for enrollment. Elevate is a very unique coaching program because it is for mid-career scholars. And our kind of slogan for the program, or our subtitle, is up-level your post-tenure career. That doesn't mean that if you're in a non-US or Canadian system, right? If you're in a system that doesn't use the word tenure, you can just substitute the word tenure for mid-career. Okay, so up-level your mid-career. So many of us hit that mid-career moment when we've just gotten a promotion, and instead of feeling like elated and relaxed and like, now I really get to do what I want, we feel more stressed out than ever. When we were developing the Elevate program 2 years ago, we talked to over 50 mid-career academic women in order to create this program. The curriculum is very much based on the experiences and the difficulties of many mid-career academics. So I am encouraging you to apply for our Elevate program if you haven't already. We'll link the application here in the show notes. I want you to apply. I want to know what you're feeling, what you're experiencing mid-career. That's something you can tell us on the application. And then we are going to send you all the information necessary for you to enroll in our program. Our program starts with our New Year's writing retreat at the end of January, but enrollment closes on December 22nd. We want you in this program. We're on a mission to help as many mid-career women and non-binary faculty make their career into what they thought it was going to be, into what you really want, into what you dream it to be. We are looking for people who want to think about their legacy. They want to think about what they are creating and how they are changing their field, how they're changing their university, how they're changing their own lives and their families' lives by stepping into the next big thing they want to create. If any of this sounds appealing to you, or if Lauren's story today sounds appealing to you, we would love to see your application for the Elevate program. We just are so excited. It is like so exciting. We've already got a great amount of people registered. They're from all different fields, many different types of universities, and we can't wait for you to join them. So apply for Elevate. We can't wait to get started, and enjoy this interview with Lauren. Hello and welcome. Today I have a guest on the podcast. So Lauren, will you please introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about your field of study and where you are in your career right now.
Sure. So my name is Lauren Braun-Strumfels. I'm a historian. I work at the intersection of U.S. immigration and Italian migration policy in the 1890s. So primarily, I'm the person who's looking at the first decade of Ellis Island and the transition from Asian exclusion to European exclusion, all the rules that we have about who can and cannot enter the country. So my work has a lot of political resonance.
Yeah.
And I'm also a transnational historian. So I work, even though I'm a US historian, that's my PhD, I work in the archives of the Italian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, looking at the way that Italians viewed the US and US law at the turn of the 20th century. So career-wise, I have been at a community college. I'm at Raritan Valley Community College in New Jersey, and I've been here 12 years. So I am associate professor of history with tenure right now. And this is the first and only full-time job that I have had. Yep. I went from graduate school. I taught for a while as an adjunct at Temple University and had a great experience there. And then I went to Raritan Valley, which was actually the first time that I was at a community college. And that transformation has also been really powerful in my career as I advocate for community college students and faculty within my discipline at large.
Yeah. Amazing. So I met Lauren through our Elevate program where she was a member and just was fascinated by her work. And I have family history that kind of fits into that historical time period. But one of the things I really, besides Lauren being like such a great, like you're such a great kind of community member, right? Like really supportive of other people in the program and everything. But also like during the time that we were working with you and kind of felt like we were seeing you, every week, you were going through the process of writing and getting your book published. And so I want to talk to you about that because it's been quite a journey. I don't know, like, where would you start? Like, if you wanted to kind of share about your book writing experience.
This is a great story, actually, because my book writing experience, I think, goes all the way back really to 2010 when I defended my dissertation and finished my PhD. So, typically, especially for historians, the first book comes out of the dissertation. But for me, as I mentioned, I had a ton of major life changes that happened. I defended, I got married, I moved across the country, and I started a tenure track job all in the same 2 months, basically. Wow. And I bought my first house. So all those things, there were a lot of adjustments. And going into a heavy teaching and service load job as well meant that I spent about 4 years really doing nothing, on my book and just really kind of trying to get my footing. Because again, the ways that I had worked in grad school, I couldn't do anymore. And I was really frustrated by that. Like the demands on my time, I hadn't figured out a way to really prioritize myself and my work within the context of my new role. Mm-hmm. So in 2014, I had the incredible honor of being the inaugural Community College Humanities Association American Academy in Rome affiliated fellow.
Wow.
So there was an 8-year gap between when I was last in Rome in my archives and then when I got to return. And I had a family now. I had, it was a totally different experience. But by going back, having that opportunity to go back into my archives, I saw my book finally. I was like, this is what it's about, because I had my dissertation focused on Italian migrants who were recruited to come to the American South to farm cotton the turn of the 20th century. And that's still a component of my work, but now it's framed within this larger history of the way in which the Italian government tried to intervene and shape and reflect, right, this evolving American gatekeeping system. Mm-hmm. So that was the aha, and being, the first community college faculty member ever in residence at the Academy was really powerful experience as well.
Yeah.
And so I came back and I was like, okay, ready to go. But that was 2014. And again, I didn't have systems in place. I didn't have I had still this ongoing frustration about being pulled in so many directions and feeling so out of control of my time. And so for me, then it was another 4 years. And then I won a sabbatical and I was like, okay, book time, let's go. Here's the thing, right? Thinking in that grad student mentality of like, I need 9 hours a day to sit in front of a computer. But then you sit down and you're like, what am I going to do? So I eased back into the writing. I had a friend who was finishing a dissertation and she and I became writing buddies. And over the time that I was on sabbatical that semester, I finished a chapter. I met, I started meeting with the editors. I did all the work. I secured, an editor and a press, and I was excited about that. But the drafting was still going fairly slowly, and I was trying to do piecemeal things. So another year and a half went by. I didn't hit any of my deadlines that I set for myself. My sabbatical came and went, and I was still working, and I was like, oh gosh. So I submitted a chapter here, a chapter there. Eventually I had 3 chapters. My editor read them. He was pretty happy with them. I was feeling good. Mm-hmm. So from there, what ended up happening was another incredible opportunity. I went back to the Academy in 2018 as a visiting fellow. I grabbed a bunch of stuff from my archives and I had these really incredible experiences. And then again, that was in the context of that sabbatical, but I came back and I was back at work. And then it was like, oh, okay. I had to make it happen, I had to figure out how to make it happen. So I was starting, that's when I discovered your podcast, Kathy. And I think I started to find it was at the beginning. Mm-hmm. And I started to think a little differently. And I did some of your workshops, mm-hmm. and I started trying to plan my writing. So that was my first step. And I was like, oh, I can plan this. It's not just, again, like there's systems here that I could use. And for me, the biggest issue that I initially had with writing for myself was really a lot of the judgment about it, because that had really marked my graduate school experience, this feeling of like being not good enough, and like being judged, judging myself, comparing, and not having that joy in the work. Mm-hmm. So in 2019, I got incredible news. And that was that I had won a Fulbright U.S. Scholar Award to Italy.
Yay.
So, yes. So I was going to go back to Rome. I was going to be there for 4 months with my family. I was going to be at the University of Rome Tre, collaborating with a scholar Daniele Fiorentino, whose work I really respect and who I had reached out to meet when I was at the Academy in 2018. It was it was really a personal and professional dream for me. And as far as I could tell, I was the first community college faculty member to go to Italy on the Scholar Award in this, at that point, 74-year history. So I was like, wow, I'm also going to be able to advocate and do a lot for my sector in this relationship. And I had all these plans. I was making calls. I was planning things. I was reaching out to my contacts at the Academy and other institutions, and it was going to be great. So 11 months went by of planning. It was not easy to get the leave time from my college. Mm-hmm. There was a lot that went into just getting ready to go. And I kept putting the book off, thinking, I'll just wait until I get there and then.
Yeah.
And then, right? So this is, this is a story that I'm sure many people are nodding out, right? Because that's what we do. I'll just wait until. Yeah. And what ended up happening, oh God, what ended up happening, right? Like,
I know what happens, listeners. So that's why I'm like, oh no. Go ahead.
And so you can, if you Google me, you can read the story I published in the American Historical Association also about what happened. But essentially, right, spoiler alert, I landed in Rome with my family there are 4 of us with my family on February 27th, 2020. Oh, God. And at that point, right, Rome was fine. Everything was totally normal in Rome. And I thought, oh, I'll just get in the country. I thought they weren't going to let me in. That was my fear. I was like, just get me on that plane. And we got on the plane, we landed. And I was like, all right, here we are. Life can begin. I had my drafts. I had my plans. I had my meeting set up. I had my archive visits. I had my class. I was going to teach 1 class a semester. Wow. I typically teach 5. I was like, hallelujah. I'm going to work with grad students, everything. And what happened was that the world shut down around me.
Yeah. And you were in the center of it, like at that moment, right? Like Italy was hit hard.
Yes. So it's emotional even now. Yeah. I've talked about it so many times. But what really happened was I had 1 week of normalcy, adjusting and, and trying to get everybody settled, but like it happened so fast that so I got my kids registered for public school, which is a funny story in and of itself. I won't tell right now. Yeah. But, and that day I remember distinctly, right? It wasn't a precipitous day because we went up to the school in the morning. We went through the whole process. And then I said, okay, I'm going to go to campus for a meeting with Erasmus students. I'm going to try to just keep getting to know my department and meeting, and recruiting students for my course. So I get on the bus and I go to campus and I walk into the meeting and I sit down. And someone comes in the room from the Department of Political Science and says, we just got the announcement from the Ministry of Education. Everything's closed.
Wow. Oh my gosh.
Effective tomorrow. And we were all sitting in a room, in a meeting.
Yeah.
And that morning I had, the secretary at the elementary school had said, okay, the kids can start Monday. And it was like, that's how fast the shutdowns happened. And after that point, then we entered into each day a more and more strict lockdown.
Yeah.
Until finally I got the message from the State Department that said I had to leave. But it was harrowing.
Yeah.
And obviously it was not just like, it was like, here's this situation that personally for my family is fraught and scary and unknown. But, what do I decide what's best for them? But also professionally, it was like, when I leave, it's done. That was clear. It was not like, put this on hold. The total amount of time that I was on my Fulbright was 2 total weeks, and 1 week was under lockdown. So I came back home, and let's just come back to the book, right?
Yeah, right, exactly. So now it's so easy to just like write the book. No.
Exactly. And again, but I think this is the depth, right, of my loss was so great. Yeah. And hopefully no one else has to go through that. But it's not, on a spectrum, right? This happens all the time. We go, I'll wait. And then something comes up, something blows up, there's something else that physically, emotionally, or mentally drains us. Yep. And then we don't get to the writing.
Yep.
So literally, like I had my draft of whatever chapter I was working on in my bag, and I don't even think I took it out. I don't even think I took it out. I mean, literally, Kathy, I had one normal day on campus. I taught a class, my first class session. I went to my office. I set myself up. I was like, all right, here's going to be my writing zone. I went and got some pizza. I was like, you'll be my pizza place. On campus, this is great. And that was it. And then the next day it shut down.
Oh,
that was it. So in that way, then what I had to do was I had to come home and I had to mourn.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that was a low point.
Yeah.
It was low. Yeah. So that was where actually, Kathy, you had a workshop that was like, I forget what you called it, but it was basically like radically, actually I can look for it because I keep in my passion planner, I keep these little notes and stuff, and I can hear. So it was like, how do you, do, here it is. It was the minimum viable semester.
Yes. Yeah. And just for people, if you all remember this, if you've been following me for a while, I did kind of a free workshop. I think 1,200 people signed up for that.
Wow.
And it was like, because I did it like in response to like lockdown and everybody started to kind of go nuts. And all of a sudden it was like, everybody was online, right? Because it was the only place we could be. And that was the biggest workshop webinar I ever did. And we had 1,200 people sign up for that. Incredible.
That webinar, it was pivotal in my transformation.
Mm-hmm.
It really was. And I think, the other thing too, is it's like, for years, I thought in order to be professional, I had to be very buttoned up. I couldn't be emotional. I couldn't have struggles, even though I had struggles, because of course I'm human. And so I think even here, even though listeners will be able to see me, you can hear, right? This process is emotional. writing a book or doing academic work is emotional. And I think it helps us when we let that breathe.
Yeah. Yeah.
We
We're
let that out.
humans. And it's
Yes.
and that's the thing, like we have this idea, or we see this somehow, however we get enculturated, I think, into this idea that I don't think that people go around thinking they're robots, but really like the result of what, it's like, oh, we're not supposed to be derailed by anything.
Yep.
Like you're supposed to kind of keep going no matter what. You have, if you're trying to write, you just have to write every day. It's like, how hard is that? Like, it's really hard when you're human.
I mean, just like imagine me. You can picture me sitting in my apartment, right, where every night at 7 p.m. the news, like the Prime Minister would come on the news and would tell us what was going to be locked down the next day.
Oh.
And I would just stick my head out the window and I would be like, are there people on the tram? Is there a tram going by? Like that was my sign.
Mm-hmm.
Is anything happening? Is there any noise?
Right.
So I'm not going to like hop up and be like, oh, it's my writing. I better get that writing done. And I think we have to acknowledge, again, it's like, the more that we try to close off the emotional needs, the less the writing happens. We cannot force it. And if we do, we are miserable.
Yeah.
So that's the other thing too. There's value in caring for the emotional self.
Yes, absolutely. I think it's necessary. It's not optional. I think there's it's been kind of painted as optional. It's not optional. You have to care for the emotional self. And also you have to, like, when you experience loss, there's a recovery period, and loss happens in so many different ways. Like, again, we're humans and we have to go through these like processes, and absolutely it affects writing 100%.
So for me to come back then to my writing was a deliberate and very careful process, almost like taking one flame, right? And trying to nurture it until it could grow into a larger fire again.
Yeah. Yeah.
So from the minimal viable semester, I really took your advice and started to apply it. So I said, okay, can I do like 1 hour of writing a week? And I did. So I was still I agreed to keep teaching my seminar. I was doing a seminar in U.S. foreign policy with my Roma Tri students, which was now online. So I said, okay, I'll do it on Zoom. And that was also a lifeline for me because we came back, we landed on March 12th. And at that point, the U.S. was still open. My state, New Jersey, was still open and quote unquote normal. Everyone was kind of starting to freak out, but we were locked in our house. We were in our own second lockdown for 2 weeks in our house. And when we came out of that, that's when New Jersey shut down. So it was literally the day that my kids were going to maybe go back to school because we had disenrolled them. We had our tenant in our house. We had to ask her to leave. I mean, it was like our whole world. And being also inside my house, which at that point was, we were in this 1,200 square foot, 2-bedroom, 1-bath house with 2 kids who are not in school. We're not in Zoom school either because we had just enrolled them to be in school in Italy, by the way. And then I was like, oh, what do I do? I'm upset. I'm crying. I'm depressed at this loss. So for me, it was having that lifeline of teaching that class, and I turned it into 1 day a week, it saved me basically, because I was still had some connection to other people, who cared about things that that I cared about, right? And in the meantime, as well, so the lockdown was the strictest, I think. It was definitely the strictest in Europe. It might have been the strictest right outside of China. So my students, they couldn't go more than 600 meters outside their apartment without special permission. Wow. They couldn't go to the park. They couldn't go, at least in my house, once my 2 weeks were up, I could drive my car and go to the woods. Right. I will tell you that Walmart became a refuge for me because it was the one store that was open and I could wander around for 3 hours with no children.
Yep. Yeah.
It was literally what even had I become, Yeah. So that was where I was at, in the spring of 2020. But the thing that I ended up doing as well is I created a support group just spontaneously for my students, but like for me and my students.
Yeah.
You know, it was kind of modeled on your philosophy, Kathy, and it was an academic support group. So we just talked about what was going on. And I started to try to, in walking them through their losses and their fears, they were totally frozen. They were going to travel to the US to research for their thesis projects. Yep. They were going to go even to the archive in Rome, couldn't get there. They couldn't, as I said, they were paralyzed.
Yeah.
And for me, I actually am kind of holding their hands through that process. I became mobile again. I got unstuck. So it started actually as something really simple. I had one student who couldn't get off the couch. She lived by herself, and so I remember I said, okay, I was like, do you think you could write for half an hour? And she was like, yeah, I think we do. I was like, let's do it at the same time. I was like, we'll text each other. We'll do it at the same time. Yeah. And that's where it started. And so from there, I ended up, then I think Kathy, soon after that, you created Momentum. And I was like, I'm in.
Yeah.
I was like, sign me up.
Yeah.
And that transformation is, it all kind of started to flow together. Like seeing my students in their struggles and in their triumphs over time slowly build themselves back up. I built myself back up. I taught my second class at Roma Tre. That one was U.S. Immigration History Seminar. That one was really meaningful, and so from there, I ended up getting to a place, right, where over time, so from what was 1 hour a week,
yeah,
even a half an hour, 1 hour, 2 hours, several days, I built myself back up. Mm-hmm. And it became, I know your suggestion at that time as well, in the depths of the, of the lockdown for us here in the US was like, just write when you can. And so that's what I did. And what ended up happening for me was that I was able to rediscover, again, the excitement about my project that had been lost over all the years and the struggles and the feeling of like, well, I wanted to meet this deadline, I didn't. And all, I was able to really reconnect to the power of my voice and the fact that I really knew that what I was writing about, that the records that I had, no one had looked at them, and that this was a powerful and meaningful contribution to my field.
Yeah.
And I think that helped get me back on track. But the thing that really kept me going was the community. So initially the community that I had created with my grad students, and then I sustained, we kept meeting in our support group over a year.
Wow. That's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm so close with them, and I've only met one of them in person once. So we laugh about it, but I'm going to see them. I'm going to see them this summer when I go back to work for another book project. So that did her thing. Okay. So at the meantime, right, I was like, I had all this stuff I wanted to do, my book, another book I was going to set up. I was going to do all these things. Well, I went back into my literally dusty old research folders from like early grad school. I mean, straight, like dusty. Mm-hmm. And I pulled some out and I was like, whoa, I have research. I don't need, I was thinking, all the things I was going to get out of the archives. I had stuff in front of me. And then I got excited about that. But I was able to do this in a way because, again, you're like, it wasn't just the shiny object syndrome. Right. Like, I'm going to move on to something new. I was laying the foundations for a pipeline.
Yeah. Yes.
Because that was the other thing that I had never done over the years that I had been really working on and off on this book, is that I wasn't supporting the development of the book with a research pipeline.
Right.
So in that way, right, I went back and I reached out to a colleague and I said, hey, remember that project we had always been kind of kicking around? I was like, would you like to do that? Would you like to collaborate with, my colleague in Rome? And it was like, great. And that's off to the races, So what all of this allowed me to do is that by the summer of 2020, I was cooking. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I had my weekly support group, which was an essential part, of kind of my self-care and then also building that community of support with my students as they worked on their thesis projects. I had momentum, which gave me exactly that I had lacked for so long, which was that momentum, which was that I started to break down my writing of the book, which is so overwhelming, right? Into a process that I knew I could do. And I knew I could do it because I kept making the task small, digestible. What can I do in an hour writing session? Okay. No more of that sit down for 7 hours.
Right.
Nonsense. That is completely unsustainable, right? Outside of, it's not even really unsustainable grad school, we pretend, And the other thing that I did is I started setting milestones and seeing those milestones and actually achieving them. And one of the big things that I took away from you was plan the work and work the plan. And I don't know, Kathy, if you remember, but early on, I would go to the Kathy seminars and I would be like, but what happens if you don't do what you say you're going to do? Right? Because that was always my problem. I'd be like, I'm going to do this. And then I wouldn't do it and I'd feel bad. So instead, what I started doing is I started giving myself permission. First of all, this is my mantra now. Do the easy stuff first. Right? Kathy calls it the low-hanging fruits, the mangoes.
Low-hanging fruit.
So, the drop off the tree when they're ripe. And that's what I started doing. And I started, instead of being like, I'm going to punish myself with the hardest part because that's how I prove that I can do this. I said, no, I'm going to do something that best parts of this big, scary project. And I'm going to roll that right into more and more successively challenging aspects of my writing cycle. So that was another huge transformation for me in recognizing the ways in which I could create those positive feedback loops and I could learn. And this is what we did, in Elevate, we really, I think, took this to the next level. I collected that data about myself. I was using that spreadsheet and that we use in Momentum to notice what can I get done. I was time testing myself. Okay? I don't know how many pages can I line edit in an hour, or I was using pre-writes to get myself started when I didn't know where to go. I had tools. And then I was seeing that progress. And that's when my productivity went through the roof. And it wasn't because I was sitting at my desk, chained to my desk.
Right.
It was because I was using a rating system. And honestly, I think I was more productive because I stopped working at night and I stopped working on the weekends and I took breaks.
Hallelujah. Did you hear that, people? She stopped working at night. She's more productive because she stopped working at night on the weekends and because she took breaks. Yes, you have to take breaks. Like, it doesn't work. And it feels counterintuitive because the natural response to feeling like I have a lot of work to do is like, I'll put more time in doing work. That's going to solve my problem. But that doesn't, not with writing, especially.
No. And that's what I discovered. So, through my long and particularly painful journey to come back to my book after, but it's not just after the loss of the Fulbright term. I mean, as I said before, this has been going on a long time. So for me, the first drafts of what would become the book, even those go back to 2018. So for me, realizing that, like, again, I wasn't going to birth this book out of my body by sheer will.
Right.
I needed systems. I needed rewards. I needed community. And I needed to get up and walk away from that computer on a regular basis and feed the other parts of myself so I could create.
Yes, that's so important. And so just to put a little pin in kind of what you've said so far, right? It's years of saying, I'll just do this when. That was, I'll just do this when I have a sabbatical. I'll just do this when I'm in Italy. I'll just do it, right? Like all of those things, because that's not, I'll just do this when is not a system. And so that doesn't work. Then it was letting yourself mourn the loss that you experienced. And coming back to the writing little by little, like if you notice, like as you're listening to this podcast that Lauren said, I started with half an hour and then I did an hour and then I did this and I had the community around me. And so it's having breaking projects into tasks, being observant about how long it takes you to do things, like not judgmental, observant, right?
Yep.
Observing that. And then you can really start to hit a stride. And before we hit record, you told me this semester I stuck to my ideal week plan every week and my writing is going like gangbusters. And so Listen to the wisdom, people. The rest is important. Walking away, feeding other parts of yourself is important. It's so important that I would say it's like part of the writing process has to be the resting process, the restorative process.
I used the Passion Planner system and I grabbed my 2020 planner.
Okay.
And in the end of the year, here's what I wrote to myself. I said, I realized that recognizing, pausing, and having a dialogue with myself, the part that feels I need to fill the time and work, that caring for that part of myself really requires the rest that I need and deserve, because rest is a radical act of care.
Yes. Yes. And Audre Lorde said that self-preservation was a radical act, right? And I think for Audre Lorde as a Black woman, like in so many different ways, right? Than it is for us even.
Yeah.
But it is, right? It's radical to think about like taking care of yourself for women. I mean, it really is. It
really is.
And good on you for doing that.
I think too, I really want to speak directly to the listeners who have the heavy teaching loads and service loads, or who are in positions where they're not, they're kind of not told that they are researchers or and for whatever reason. And so I think in that way, right, when we wait, we kind of like want someone to bring us the time and the space to do this work. It's not going to happen. We have to take it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that is also, I think, a radical act for, especially, right, for people who identify as women in academia. And in particular, I'm going to layer onto that those of us who are outside of the R1 system.
Yeah. I mean, thinking about writing a book while you're teaching 5 classes is really a lot. And here you are doing it.
So, I take all my weekends off.
Yeah. All the weekends are off. Yes. So give us like the kind of happy ending to the story, which I know it's not totally over yet, but like, how's the book going now? What does finishing the book look like for you right now? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So one of the things that brought me to your programs, Kathy, was really that I recognized, like I knew that there were messages that I was giving myself about my writing that were getting in my own way. And I also recognized that there were aspects of the systemic nature of academia that were also problems that I could reassert control over if I knew how. Yes. So that was what's really been so transformative about working with you, is that it addresses both those personal and those systemic barriers. And that's really been work that I've been trying to bring forward out into the world. So one of the things that for me personally was an issue is that I had always felt both invisible in my field, right? Like siloed at a community college. And I also was exhausted from fighting the fights to try to be the kind of scholar teacher that I knew I was, but that no one seemed to be recognizing.
Right.
So for me, like what I really needed to do was I craved the connection to my discipline, to my field, to that. And again, to what for me, right, work that is inherently political because it's about immigration, migration, borders.
Yeah.
So, and gatekeeping. And so for me, like I needed, so that connection and that visibility started to come to me through the community that you've created within your programs. And that also through as well the community that I started to reach out and create, right, and connect with in my field. And by actually finally getting writing out into the world, I published my first research journal article in March of 2021. Mm-hmm. And I also I have another research article that's right now in R&R. I published 2 pieces in Perspectives. I finished my book manuscript. I got approved for IRB and I wrote a book chapter.
It's amazing. It's like many
in less than a year.
Yeah. Yeah.
Rewind to listen to my story of 2010 to 2020, Yeah. And I say all of that too, not, in a way, because I think the meaning here is like, let's celebrate each other and see, like, if I can do this in a 5-5, like, it's possible. Yeah. It's possible. And so coming back around to my book specifically, I drafted my book and I sent it off for peer review right on time on my schedule that I created because I studied myself and I knew what I was capable of doing. Mm-hmm. And I sent it off in August of 2020. I'm trying to think, was that right?
I feel like that's right. But
yes, that's right. Yeah. I sent it off. And then I went and I rewarded myself. I had a week-long vacation planned. So it was like perfect timing. I enjoyed my vacation, totally free, of any, I didn't bring anything. Yeah. And then my book went into peer review. I submitted my manuscript. I'll say it this way because I think this is helpful for readers. I submitted my manuscript to my editor. She read it. She made some suggestions that she thought would help strengthen it before peer review. Mm-hmm. And I set up and I spent the fall doing that. And I turned it back around by October. So that's the other thing too. Unlike before where I would kind of wring my hands and kind of, how do I handle this? This is too big. This is too, the stakes are too high. I just was like, okay, let me make a spreadsheet. Let me plan out my time. Let me reward myself. Yeah. Let me take that time off in between, right? Mm-hmm. Because it's not just like, because I got something done. Now I need to immediately go to the next.
Exactly.
And I kept going through that cycle of easy stuff first.
Yeah.
Again, half an hour, right? That mentality, like kind of work my way in slowly on ramp, you don't go from 0 to 60.
Yeah.
So I did that. So then the manuscript went back out in October of 2020 and it took a long time because it was under consideration for a series. So it had 4
wow.
years.
Yeah.
And about 6 months later, it came back, which was a bit long. So, and it came back and I was poised. My editor was really happy with it. I was like, great. Okay. And I was telling myself, whatever I get from the peer review process, I can handle it.
Yeah.
I was self-talking my way to success.
Yeah.
And what ended up happening was probably, I'm not going to say it was the worst thing, but it was pretty devastating because what ended up happening was that I was like, I'm prepared. I can do this. I can handle this. And in my peer review process, I had one reviewer who really, really hated my work. And, it's like, the reviewer too syndrome. But in this case, it ended up being a dead end for me with that, working with that press, unfortunately. And I talk about this because I think it's important. Once I started to reach out to, close colleagues in my field, whom I trusted and I was like, hey, this is going on. They were like, oh yeah, that happened to this person, or oh yeah, that happened to me. And I was like, oh, we don't talk about that.
Yeah.
And I want to talk about it because I think it's important that it, is that part of what unfolded for me. The past me would have stopped, would have shelved the project, would have taken it as an indication that it wasn't worthy, right? I had gotten an R&R on an article in 2015 that I put in a drawer. I could not deal. Did that piece ever get published? No, not in that form. But you know what? It is coming out because that's that R&R that I have now, and that's better. And I think part of this is knowing that when we get first of all, don't be the harsh peer reviewer. Let me just say that.
And
don't reproduce that.
Yes. And for the listeners, can you give us like, so I remember because I was coaching Lauren at the time, like, so I remember this is not like you need to make your paragraph transitions better or please add these sources. It was a review that was like, this person would not be convinced by anything you did. This person was telling you, you will never convince me. And so I think that's something else that people need to understand is that it's devastating to get feedback like that. But also, if I remember the way I coached you at the time and the way we talked about it, it was like, ooh, you hit a nerve.
Yes.
You have something important to say because you really made this person angry. And so sometimes and of course, like many times, and depending on when you are in your career and you might lack confidence and all these things, you kind of want to hide under a rock. But to reframe that, it's like, if you are making this person this angry, then you are saying something important and new.
Bingo.
You know? Yes. So what happened? So you decided, right, to not take that feedback and not publish with that press.
So, and this was a very difficult decision. Yeah. It wasn't like one of those angry breakups where you storm off and you're like,
right,
I never want to see you again.
Right.
In some ways, right, this one review really stalled out my forward momentum. Yeah. And that was not the desire, of my editor who saw the value, and also saw the problematic nature of that review.
Yeah.
So what I was able to do is, even I had a lot of conversations about this. I went through a process, which listeners, you should know exists, where you can write a letter of response that says, here's how I'm going to respond to the reviewer's concerns and critiques. And then you submit that. And then sometimes that can continue, your relationship can continue with that. But for me, as Kathy was saying, this person was not going to accept my work no matter what I did to it. And the irony was not lost on me that I'm a historian of gatekeeping. And some people in my field were trying to gatekeep me.
Yeah. Yeah.
But what also I think is really important in my story is that, again, I had changed in such a way that I realized that this was not a reason to be quiet. This was a reason to shout even louder from the rooftops, my arguments, to dig in instead of falling down. And that, right? The power of this kind of academic self that's really rooted deeply, right? In a powerful, not just a sense of self, but a sense of community, because the roots of a tree feed that tree, but they're also, they're fed by the trees in the grove. I was just listening yesterday to the author Jhumpa Lahiri, who is the only person who has ever explained how I feel compelled to study Italian language and history. Anyway, and she was talking about, like tending to the garden of Italian. For her, as a literature scholar, as a writer. Mm-hmm. And I was just kind of thinking of that metaphor, right? And in that way, when we toil alone as academics, when we think that somehow I should be able to publish a book and have a book because that's what scholars do. But on the flip side, when the process is challenging or when I don't know how to navigate it, it means there's something wrong with me, right?
Right.
That is so isolating. And it's not true. Yeah. It's not true. So Momentum was amazing and Elevate was amazing in being part of this process and having these communities, because what I was able to do is I was able to take that reader report and actually joke about it. And the co-writers in the writing group, I would type something, in the chat and the way we share our progress and our frustrations, and we share with each other sometimes when we're working. And everybody was like, like right on. And that was really meaningful because it just reinforced that we shouldn't go at this alone. Mm-hmm. And that when we face challenges and barriers in our writing process, that instead of, again, folding in and hiding, that the best and most powerful thing to do is to bloom.
Yes. 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 And I think like that process, it's like so painful. Oh my gosh. Like so many of the things you've talked about today, it's like, this was painful.
I didn't realize I needed the tissue.
Side, like I was like, on the other side, I learned these things, but this to me, I think that you'll agree, has really solidified your message. It's solidified your pipeline. Like now, as you said earlier, right? Like I didn't have a pipeline. It was like a one-off project, it was like, no, now there's a message, there's an argument, there's a pipeline, there's a book 2, you know, like
and a book 3.
Ooh, oh, see, it's a pipeline. It becomes this. And sometimes that having somebody try to shut you up makes you figure out how important your message is and what it really is. Yeah. I remember talking to you specifically. I mean, I don't remember right now what the message was, but I remember saying like, oh, well, that's pissing people off because they've been thinking about it this way the whole time. And you're saying, no, you should think about it this way. It's like, that's what scholarship is. And so the fact I mean, I think nobody should have to go through review processes that are rude and horrible. And I'm sorry that you had to go through that. And the way you've been able to kind of take it up and help it propel you is really inspiring, I think. So you have another book contract, like the book is coming out. The book's going to happen.
Yeah. Can't keep me down.
Yeah, right.
So what happened was, again, I reached out. I got the support that I needed from my peer group, from Momentum, from Elevate. And I also reached out to colleagues and I started to say, hey, I've got this project, because what I did is I also revised my introduction and I dug into those arguments. And I was like, you know, instead of saying, oh, well, I didn't actually mean that. Instead, I was like, nope, I'm going to plant my flag and I'm going to say, this is what I'm arguing. And this is why it's important in the face of that skepticism. Yeah. And in revising my introduction with that framework and that power behind my writing, now I wrote something I'm really proud of. And then I shared it to another press with the permission, you know, the one that I've been working with, understanding, right, that we were probably at the end of the road there. And so in doing that, I was able to find another press that was really excited about my work and was really excited. I think in the words of the series editor was like, basically like, we like all the things that the other person didn't like, you know, like, yay! We want that.
Yes.
And that also was, you know, again, it's like thinking about a dating metaphor, you know, it's like support yourself because you're like, well, you know, this is what this person wants me to be or do. And then of course our relationship can't survive on that because you're not being authentic.
Right.
But the more that I leaned into who I was as a historian and the real power of these sources, because to come back all the way around to it, there was a fire at Ellis Island in 1897 that destroyed a lot of records. So for me, I have these records that spotlight a period that from the Anglophone, from the American records, is a gap, is literally missing in some places. And my archive is also really, really difficult to work in. But, you know, I'm reading handwritten diplomatic reports.
Wow.
Imagine if someone just picked up all the stuff on your desk that you've scribbled on over the years and like
horrifying.
Right? So that's what I'm reading. So I'm putting these pieces back together that we've always been missing out of this puzzle. And in that way, you know, I was able to rediscover the joy and the excitement in my work and in its meaning. And also I was able to do that in a way that, again, felt grounded and rooted and not like I'm trying to prove
that
I belong.
Right.
That's another part of this transformation. I think that, Kathy, that Elevate brought me to, allowed me to see. And, you know, again, realizing that listeners are going to be at all different stages of their careers. But I think, you know, one of the ways in which maybe people who are earlier along can try to manifest this, right, is finding a community of support, building it.
Yeah.
If it doesn't already exist, building it, and then both giving and receiving that support, which is essential. I think that's also part of transforming academia from a place of competition and isolation to a place of mutual support and encouragement. Because when the work gets out there, we all benefit.
Yes.
And when we have a healthier relationship to our writing, and when our academic self, when we feel that academic self is cared for and valued, but is not the only thing feeding our emotional needs, and there's some separation, then we're also happier and healthier within this system that is not designed right
for us.
For us.
Yes. Well, I think that's actually a great place to end this conversation. And I really thank you, Lauren, for being willing to come and talk about this story. And I mean, I can't wait to read your book. So we'll link up in the show notes, Lauren's Twitter handle and key information in case you want to connect with her there. And Lauren, thank you so much again.
Oh, this has been an absolute pleasure. I mean, I think, your philosophy and what you bring to academia is fundamentally transformed my life. And for that, I'm grateful.
Well, I'm so glad.
I want to bring this forward, to more and more people. And that's really a part of my mission. And so, if people do want to connect, you'll see that a lot of the work that I do is forward facing on kind of trying to encourage a new relationship that I call radical possibility in academia, where we can envision the kinds of careers that we want to have, and we can be intentional about bringing that about.
Wow, wonderful. Thank you so much, Lauren.
Thank you, Kathy.
Thank you so much for spending your valuable time supporting yourself and your writing by listening to this episode. If you like what you heard today, the best way to say thank you is to hop on over to Apple iTunes and write an honest review. The more reviews, the more amazing academic women and non-binary people will find this podcast. So go write one now.